Muslim Brotherhood, Sheikh Hassan al-Banna, which says in Arabic, ستقوم إسرائيل وستظل قائمة إلى أن يبطلها الإسلام كما أبطل ما قبلها. Means Israel will come to existence and will continue to exist until Islam neutralizes it as it neutralized other evil forces before that. Now, why we're talking about this subject is that for the benefit of the media students, I would like to talk about how media distorts and the facts. It's not only fake news, it's also facts. So in the recent years, we have seen a young Muslim media journalist, brilliant young man named Mehdi Hasan, who emerged as a successful journalist from his Oxford Union debates. The most famous one among was whether the Islam is a peaceful religion or otherwise. With his presentation, with his eloquent speech, with his forceful argument, he became very popular. And then he moved to Al Jazeera channel as well, where he conducts the program called Upfront. He confronts the people of authority and position on different issues, and he has been very constructive on that. Now, recent months, he has moved to United States, where he has joined a media organization called Intercept. For them, he presents a program called Blowback. Blowback is a media term, is a term used by intelligence agencies. Intelligence agencies, when they plan an operation, these operations sometimes do not succeed. They backfire, in other words. So this backfiring is called blowback. So under this series of programs, he has presented recently a program about Hamas. The way he has presented the program, it gives the impression from the very beginning that the Hamas is a terrorist organization. The title of the program is How Israel Went from Helping Create Hamas to Bombing It. How Israel went from helping create Hamas to bombing it. The whole proposition is that it was to counter PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, that Israel helped create Hamas. And there was nothing wrong if Mehdi Hasan had presented in a professional way. But he has presented only one side. He starts with the live quotation from the speech of Benjamin Netanyahu, then Barack Obama, then Ehud Barak, and Isaac Rabin, and Senator Ron Paul. All of them summarize whatever they say. We can summarize that Hamas is a terrorist organization which has been responsible for killing hundreds of innocent Israelis. And Ehud Barak says they have been sending thousands of rockets across the border to Israel. Now, why Mehdi Hasan presented such a program and having a U-turn on the kind of contribution he has been doing, positive and impartial presentation of different issues, is a puzzle. Whether he is in the phase of self-destruction, he has reached his climax, although he is still in his early 40s, or does he want to earn further fame, or what? Or this is just a requirement of working in the United States, where he is afraid to face the same fate if he continues on his earlier path. What was met by the famous philosopher, academic, and the thinker Ismail Raji al-Faruqi, or what happened to Dr. Tariq Ramadan in Europe, again a very powerful, successful academic and a philosopher in his own way, or what happened to Dr. Zakir Naik in his own country. We do not know what happened to Mehdi, but we were shocked with his lopsided presentation of facts. Now, when we coming to the point of the Palestinian resistance, we need to go back to the World War I. Even before that, World War I, 1914 to 1918. This was the time when the British promised the Jews to establish their own homeland on the Palestinian territory in Palestine. Before the World War I itself, Jews had been planning for this, and in fact, they approached Sultan Abdul Hamid II and offered him huge amounts of money for him personally and for his empire. But Sultan Abdul Hamid rejected and threw out Herzl from his office. Through the World War I, as I said, the Balfour Treaty declaration was made, which is under the name of Mr. Balfour, Arthur Balfour, who was the British foreign minister. And while the World War I was still going on, there was the backstabbing of the Ottoman Empire in Arabia, which was planned and enacted by the British, while Sharif Hussein declared rebellion against the Ottoman Empire, and with the help of the British and the tribes, they succeeded in forcing the Ottomans to leave the Arabia. And another thing which happened while the war was still on, in 1916, there was an agreement between the British and the French, British represented by Mr. Sykes and French represented by Mr. Pickett, which came to be known as Sykes-Picot Agreement. In Arabic, they call it Sykes-Picot Agreement, a notorious agreement in which they, before the fall of the Ottoman Empire, they agreed between themselves how to distribute the bounty of the Ottoman Empire. And this was blessed by Russians and Italians as well. So this is the background of the Palestinian issue. And Palestinians realized this, and they started having their operations against the British, who were already there, and formally Palestine came under British mandate in 1920. And Palestinians started their struggle against the British occupation, and what they had sensed that Jews are being brought in large numbers, and there is going something to be fishy, and they understood that they were going to lose their homeland, and different resistance groups started. One of the first was Al-Fidaiyya, and it was led by scholars, Muslim scholars like Hassan Abu Soud, Muhammad Yusuf al-Alami, and Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, the famous Mufti of Palestine, great scholar who had very friendly relations with Sheikh Hassan al-Banna later on. In 1930, another group called Usbat al-Jihad al-Islamiyya was established by famous Azzuddin al-Qassam, on whose name Hamas established their military wing, Qata'ib al-Qassam regiments. This was in 1930, and he conducted his operations across the Palestine and in Levant, and he even coordinated support for the Libyan resistance, and he established a group of young men called Jamiyat Shibban al-Muslimin on the pattern of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. So their resistance continued. So in the meantime, there was a very important event which took place in the history of the Muslim world and the Middle East, was establishment of the Muslim Brotherhood under the leadership of the Sheikh Hassan al-Banna, a charismatic figure, a teacher, scholar, a social worker. He was very popular among the masses and among the scholars as well. and he got a great support from all across the board. And he immediately started to establish the branches in the Palestine, especially, and in Levant as well. And this struggle continued for a long time. Now, in 1935, when Izzuddin al-Qassam was assassinated, martyred, Muhammad Amin al-Husseini tried to unite all the known factions or groups rather across the Palestine, and he succeeded in that. Again, a charismatic figure. In 1936, there was a revolution against the British occupation and settlement of Jews, and this was called the Palestinian Revolution, Thawra al-Falastiniya. But on the other hand, the British had been planning very well to formally establish the Jewish homeland. This was through the personalities like T.E. Lawrence and many others. And they were able to do so with under the command of General Edmund Allenby. So this continued the fight against the the British occupation, British mandate, and the settlement of Jews continued throughout the Palestine. And in 1948, Israel was formally declared as a state of the Jewish nation. And in months coming, Palestinians in thousands were displaced, massacred, destroyed. Their homes were destroyed, and they had no option but to leave. Very few remained in different scattered parts of Palestine and, of course, in Jerusalem, pockets. And there was something called a Nakba catastrophe in 1949. Palestinians suffered a catastrophe, and they were forced to leave their homeland and to settle in the neighboring adjacent countries like Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt and countries beyond that. And so they lost all the hope, and what they thought, they will conduct the operations, they will organize themselves and conduct the operations from across the border from these countries, but which did not prove to be right. In the meantime, in Egypt, what happened, King Farouk, who was at the helm of the affairs at the time, was pressurized by the British and the French and the Americans at the time to withdraw support from the groups, rather to withdraw the groups from Palestine, because they had noticed the severe and stiff fight in these Muslim Brotherhood-led groups were giving to the British mandate and to the Jewish occupation, and they felt that their plan of planting the Israeli state was in doldrums. So what they did is that King Farouk announced a ceasefire, and he asked his army to withdraw the support and in fact to fight these groups in Palestine. And within Egypt also, the cadres were arrested and they were given a hard time. And until 1949, when Sheikh Hassan al-Banna was martyred, assassinated in Cairo. This soon, in a few years, followed by the revolution, Free Officers' Revolution in Egypt, whereby General Najib and Jamal Abdel Nasser led the revolution, and later on it was hijacked by Jamal Abdel Nasser. And Jamal Abdel Nasser had to show some of his charisma, and he in fact drew support from the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood at the time was very popular, very powerful, and with the support of Muslim Brotherhood, they overthrew the King Farouk. And this was has been well documented. Even Jamal Abdel Nasser, he used to go on the grave of Sheikh Hassan al-Banna and pray there, and they had very good relations. Later on, when he felt that Muslim Brotherhood could be a threat for his power, he turned against them. And that is again a tragic chapter of the history of the Middle East. So following this kind of setbacks to the Palestinian cause and to the Muslim Brotherhood, in spite of all that, they kept fighting in their different groups. And a new group also came into being called Fatah. Fatah was actually, which was established by Yasser Arafat, but the people who supported him were the supporters of Muslim Brotherhood, like Khalil al-Wazir, Salah Khalaf, Abu Rauf, and others. They were all cadres of Muslim Brotherhood. And later on, when the Egyptian government felt continuous threats from Israel, they, after having nationalized the Suez Canal, which was a good point for Jamal Abdel Nasser, what happened? They and through the Arab League, they organized an umbrella organization called PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. Its first chairman was Ahmad al-Shuqairi, who happened to be the son of the Mufti of the Ottoman army, Fourth Army in the Levant. So all this resistance drew support from the Islamists and later on the Muslim Brotherhood. And Arab League negotiated support from the popular organization Muslim Brotherhood officially. They did it. So in other words, the Muslim Brotherhood and PLO, they fought shoulder to shoulder, and all other groups as well. But what happened in time that Egypt and other adjacent Arab countries had to face a humbling defeat, a shameful defeat at the hands of Israel in 1967, wherein Israel captured West Bank, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights, and of course the Gaza itself, which had been under the Egyptian control. It was a very humbling defeat, wherein there was heavy loss of life, heavy loss of military personnel and equipment and aeroplanes, whatnot is the history. So when Egypt became so weak, they started thinking other ways. And in between, there were other wars also with the Israelis. In 1973 war, which was again a very humbling defeat for Egyptians. And until 1978, when Israel and Egypt, under the American patronage, signed the Camp David Agreement, and according to which Egypt signed the agreement of recognizing Israel, and Israel returned Sinai in return. So this was claimed to be a victory by the Egyptians because they got Sinai back. But in fact, it was again a big blow to the Arab cause, the Palestinian cause, and it was a victory for Israel because they got recognized. And the biggest country, most important country in the Arab world, was sidelined from the Palestinian cause. So this was again a signal to the Palestinians that they have been left alone, and they were very feeble at the time. So now, before that, in these Palestinians, when they tried to show some resistance across the borders, in 1970, King Hussein moved against them. He did a severe operation against them. Perhaps there were some mistakes from the Palestinians also, which they should not have done. But it was a heavy-handed operation against the Palestinians. They were again massacred in Jordan. And following that, in 1976, there was another massacre against the Palestinians in Lebanon under the Syrian commanded by Hafiz al-Assad and support from the Maronite Christian militias and again in 1982 there was the invasion of Lebanon by the Israeli army, and there was again huge massacre of Palestinians. So Palestinians were left like a lame duck, and they started thinking, of course, with the Egyptian incitement and with the inspiration from Americans, they should compromise with Israel, and they wish they did later on in the form of the agreements like Oslo and etc. So through this point, the Islamists, the sincere people, resistance of the Israel, of the Palestinians, they started thinking on different lines that there is no hope from PLO. PLO has been rendered into a useless platform. So they started organizing their own cadres. So in 1983, an attempt was made by Ahmed Yassin. He organized the resistance in Gaza, and he was able to show and he was able to train youth, and he came to be noticed and he was put in jail. Later on, he was released. In 1987, there was an accident wherein a Israeli truck driver hit a Palestinian car. 4 people were killed and many were injured, which sparked first Intifada. And Hamas gained again, Hamas was declared at the time. In 1987, Hamas was declared to be a resistance, Harak al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, Islamic resistance movement. And since then, they got a huge support from across the Arab world, Muslim world. But later on, they were also left alone, and but they showed the stiff resistance that Israel was forced to vacate Gaza, and Gaza came under the Hamas administration rule. And since then, they have been showing stiff resistance, very organized. They have set up their own military wing, Al-Qassam brigades, and they have developed their own humble way, arms, rockets, which the program in Mehdi Hasan's program, Ehud Barak, complained against that. They are sending thousands of rockets and scaring the Israelis and sending to the shelters, and so on and so forth. So the only hope, and of course there are some other groups like Al-Jihad al-Islami, only hope now left for the Palestinian cause is the Hamas. Because now what has happened in the years recently is that after Egypt and Jordan, etc., other Arab countries have started to normalize their relations, so-called normalize their relations with the Jewish state, leaving the Palestinians nowhere. Now, the only hope is this one. And to mention Mehdi Hasan again, Mehdi Hasan must know that all through the Muslim lands, the resistance has always been led by the Muslim scholars, whether it was the Libyan resistance led by Umar al-Mukhtar or Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, Algeria. They have been before. And in fact, the PLO, what he claims the Hamas was established to counter it, was fairly a late comer in 1964. And in fact, Yasser Arafat himself was very close to when he was in Egypt as a student, etc. He was very close to Islamic Brotherhood. Later on, he had to change his stance, his positions, compromise because of the Arab treachery as a whole. So now, this is what I want to say again, is that Hamas was not created by Israel. It is a grassroots movement. It is the moment which comes out of, emanates from the spirit of Muslim spirit to fight against the oppression, to fight against the injustice. And Mehdi Hasan, you are wrong in saying that it was created by Israel. You have not supported your claim by facts. And may Allah guide you to the right path, and may Allah guide all of us to see the truth as truth. Thank you for listening. God bless us all. Assalamu alaikum.